Well, thank you so much, Bridget, for hosting us. Thank you, Ava, for doing the readings, and Maria for your beautiful response, and all of you for coming out today. I think we have some new people today as well as some continuing. Last week, we talked about courage, which is one of the four cardinal or classical virtues, and about hope, which was one of the three theological virtues in the Christian tradition. And our focus was on 12th night. And so those four cardinal plus three theological equal the seven virtues that you'll see in cathedrals and frescoes all over Europe and elsewhere around the world. Today, I want to talk about love and dignity in Romeo and Juliet. I'm also going to touch on hospitality as a third virtue. Now, dignity may seem like an unlikely entry point into a drama which is fueled by the playful energy of teenagers, not exactly dignified, but I want to argue that the forms of recognition explored by the two lovers end up shifting the conversation around human worth and personhood in Fair Verona. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second here to get everything going. Great, so you can see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to start with love, which is the prime mover of Shakespeare's most romantic play. And is love a virtue? It is one of the three theological virtues that we looked at last week, but the word for love here is agape, or often translated as charity, and not eros, which is what we think of more as romantic or passionate or sexual love. Romantic love in the Christian tradition, however, has a spiritual dimension. And we see this very strongly, for example, in Dante, who is actually the first to mention a feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. And so he is a kindred spirit and a distant source for this play. This is a slide that I use when teaching Romeo and Juliet. And what I've created here is a ruler that measures from the bodily to the spiritual dimensions of love. And romantic love, as you see, is right in the middle, combining worldly and otherworldly aspects. When studying love in Shakespeare with my students, you are my students and my co-learners today, I like to look for three things across the plays. This is a very nice comparative activity. Love is a game in social practice. Love as an art of words and gestures. And finally, love as a bid for transcendence. So I'll start with love as a game in social practice. And what I mean by that is, how is the search for a partner formalized through games, including games of chance? What are the apps or applications that bring people together who might not otherwise meet? And in Romeo and Juliet, it's the masked ball and the social dancing that occurs during the ball, which introduces anonymity and an element of chance into that highly regulated world of aristocratic arranged marriages. It's also, interestingly, a scene of hospitality in which strangers and even enemies enter a space where their presence invites some measure of toleration. Love is also an art of word and gestures. So I always ask myself, do the lovers speak in prose or verse? If they speak in verse, is it rhyming or blank verse? In Romeo and Juliet, poetry rules. It's the sonnet as a poem, a game, and also a dance form that brings them together. And the lovers, in fact, never speak prose to each other. This is a stark contrast from lovers like Rosalind and Orlando, or Beatrice and Benedict, for whom prose is the preferred mode of conversation. And then finally, love is a bid for transcendence, as a form of aspiration that reaches through and within our deep attachment to other people to realize higher goods and imagine new worlds. And that's where dignity is going to come into our story. So poetry rules in Romeo and Juliet. Like Shakespeare's other early plays, 70% of the play is written in verse, and a lot of that verse is rhyming. And Romeo is himself something of a poet, right? At the beginning of the poem, he pens some pretty terrible verses in praise of his first love, Rosalind. Um, and that's a little bit like Orsino communicating with Olivia by text message in Twelfth Night last week. Rosalind we can think of as Romeo's starter muse. Now, when Romeo meets Juliet at the ball, he begins to craft poetry with her and not just about her. And indeed, their first exchange, which occurs at the sidelines of the Capulet ball, takes the form famously of a sonnet. And Ava is going to read this for us.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentler sin is this: my lips to blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Have not saints lips and holy palmers too? Ay, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you. So this exchange is a dialogue, but it is written as a sonnet. And this slide visualizes this for you. It's 3 quatrains with an A-B rhyme scheme, and then a couplet, which is a pair of rhyming lines, which is exactly how Shakespeare's sonnets are by and large composed. I want to say a little bit about that couplet. Just as the 2 lines come together in their end words, right, sake and take, the lips of the lovers come together in the kiss. So through rhyme, language is kissing itself, and through the couplet, the 2 lovers become a couple. The sonnet is organized around one basic conceit or extended image, which is the idea that Romeo is a pilgrim and Juliet is a saint. A palmer is a pilgrim, and he is comparing himself to a pilgrim touching the hands of Saint Juliet at her shrine. And this is the palmer's kiss, the 2 palms coming together, but also the pilgrim touching the hand of the saint. Many puns in there. And so there's clearly a religious aspect of their language that, however playful, already colors and elevates their mutual attraction. In the palmer's kiss, Romeo and Juliet touch palms. And the gesture is taken from social dance, where people keep changing partners in an orderly fashion, moving from palm to palm, so that everyone in the room gets to meet each other, right? And this is that element of game that is part of romance. Romeo takes Juliet out of the social dance and into this sonnet space, which they build together. And in this sonnet space, they begin to recognize themselves outside the aristocratic constraints of their families. The palmer's kiss is both perfectly lateral and linking them in mutual recognition and reciprocal mirroring. And it also points upwards aspirationally, right? Sublimating their love towards a higher order of meaning through this playful language of worship. I love in Baz Luhrmann's film, Romeo plus Juliet, where the lovers compose their sonnet and they consummate their kiss in a glass elevator. So the elevator is a kind of image of the sonnet itself as a form of this enclosed, beautiful, crystalline space that they've created through their language and their gestures. And the elevator goes up as they kiss, right? Beautifully visualizing both the joy of co-presence and that aspirational surge of the lovers towards a space of transcendental value. And notice that Juliet here is dressed in angel wings, right? She reminds me of Giotto's allegory of hope that we looked at last time. So the Palmer's kiss trembles with erotic desire and linguistic play while also aspiring towards sublimity. And so, what are they aspiring to in and beyond their desire to be together? And this is where I want to introduce dignity. And we're going to turn to a very different sonnet. This is the sonnet delivered by the chorus at the very beginning of the play. Ava?
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage, the which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend.
Beautiful, thank you. So what strikes me here is the end word, right? Dignity is the first end word of the first line in the play. And so I'm circling it as a word that's probably significant for the play as a whole. So what is dignity? Well, we really have, I want to talk about two different definitions or transformations of dignity. The first is dignity is inherited status and prestige, right? And that's very much the sense in this opening line. Two houses, both alike in dignity, both aristocratic, equal in social status. And that equality creates rivalry between them. There's a kind of battle here for prestige. And I'm going to call this status dignity. Now, when we talk about dignity today, we often have a much broader sense of dignity as involving the inherent self-worth, the creative or virtuous capacities, and eventually the rights-bearing status of all human beings. So we can maybe contrast status dignity with human dignity. Not something which Shakespeare fully articulates because it is a modern idea, but we can see the kind of building blocks and material of a modern sense of dignity in this play and in other plays. Here's a couple of passages that we can look at where Shakespeare seems to be giving dignity a moral meaning. Ava?
O Hamlet, what a falling off there was from me whose love was of that dignity that it went hand in hand even with the vow I made to her in marriage.
So that's King Hamlet talking about Gertrude, the ghost of King Hamlet, I should say. And I'm interested here in that link between love and dignity, the two key terms of my lecture today. King Hamlet is elevating a form of love that belongs to marriage. And interestingly, given our Palmer's kiss, that is associated with going hand in hand, right? Hand in hand implies reciprocity and consent. Hand in hand implies mutual recognition and respect. As Gertrude and the king went hand in hand, so does love and dignity go hand to hand in this passage. Ava?
The poor monster's my subject, and he shall not suffer indignity.
So that's kind of an amazing line. This is from The Tempest, and Stephano, the drunken sailor, is talking about that creature Caliban, who has suffered indignity at the hands of Prospero. And Caliban is demonized and otherized throughout the play, but in a line like this, Shakespeare is also granting him the possibility of human dignity, a dignity that Caliban will indeed manifest at key moments in the drama. And then finally from Troilus and Cressida.
But value dwells not in particular will. It holds his estimate and dignity, as well wherein 'tis precious of itself as in the prizer.
Beautiful. So what's happening here? This is a conversation between Troilus and Hector, who are two Trojans. And they are arguing about whether Helen of Troy, is worth fighting for. Now, for Troilus, who's not the speaker here, the war is about the battle for prestige. For Troilus, dignity is status dignity, pure and simple. And so for him, Helen is absolutely worth the fight, because it's only through war, through rivalry and conflict, that the Trojans can establish and defend their own dignity, their heroic standing or status. Hector, however, who is the speaker of these lines, takes a different approach to dignity. He's arguing here that dignity is precious of itself, right? It's not pure prestige, socially determined, but inheres in individuals. And Helen, he says, lacks this dignity, and so she is not worth fighting for. Okay, so with that little bit of research behind us, let's return to Romeo and Juliet. The battle about dignity is in part a battle between generations, right? The Montague and Capulet parents are locked in status dignity, while Romeo and Juliet are finding their way towards something more like human dignity. That's not the whole picture, however, because even though Capulet disregards Juliet's desires and threatens to throw her out of the house later in the play, he's kind of a mini King Lear, we do see his virtuous capacities to recognize the dignity of others beyond the feud in the party scene. And this passage is from the party scene. There it is. Tybalt has caught sight of Romeo, and who has entered the festivities masked and uninvited. And Tybalt is mad as hell. Capulet, however, who is the host of the party, restrains him. Ava?
'Tis he, that villain Romeo. Content thee, gentle coz, let him alone. He bears him like a portly gentleman, and to say truth, Verona brags of him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. I would not for the wealth of all the town here in my house do him disparagement. Therefore be patient, take no note of him. It is my will, the which if thou respect, show a fair presence and put off these frowns, and ill-beseeming semblance for a feast.
Thank you. This is really a very interesting moment to me because, like, Capulet is super invested in the feud, but suddenly, here in his own home, as host, he's willing to suspend his animosity and to recognize Romeo's value, Romeo's virtue, right? A virtuous and well-governed youth. So what is it that allows Capulet to suspend one form of dignity and, at least for a moment, entertain another? Well, for me, the answer is, whoops, I need to go back, and this is not working very well. Just a second, let me get back to where I want to be. There we are. Okay, sorry. So for me, the answer to that question is hospitality. And in my book on Shakespeare and virtue, I plan to start with hospitality as the mother of all virtues. In pre-political societies like the ones depicted in Homer, guests had special rights, even if they were enemies. At the end of the Iliad, for example, Greek Achilles entertains Trojan Priam in his tent. This was called xenia, guest friendship, or the laws of hospitality, right? Xenophobia is the opposite of xenia. And in this discourse, guests were considered to be potentially gods or angels in disguise, right? They had a divine character that symbolized their dignity as guests and also protected their special status because guests are very, very vulnerable. Now, Capulet doesn't think of Romeo as an angel, but he does recognize Romeo as a virtuous and well-governed youth. And it is a situation of hospitality in particular that solicits this recognition from the host. Now, in the three monotheisms, there we go. Okay. In the three monotheisms, there's a divine element to human dignity as well, insofar as human dignity is linked to the idea that human beings are created in the image of God. And here is the proof text from the Hebrew Bible, and Ava has agreed to read this in Hebrew and English for us.
Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo b'tselem Elohim bara oto zakar unkeva bara otam. And God created the human in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them.
That was wonderful. Thank you. So this is Robert Alter's translation. And notice that Robert Alter actually sets these three lines as verse. Here's how it looks in the page of my volume. He goes from prose to verse. Now, what is Hebrew verse? Hebrew poetry doesn't use either rhyme or meter. Instead, it uses parallelism, in which you say the same thing three times in different words, right? And so how does that work in this major passage? Well, first of all, there's the statement, right? The number one, right? And God created the human, Adamah, in his name. And then it comes again in a kind of a chiasmus. It's repeated, but now instead of God creating man in his image, God created man. So there's a kind of fold and mirroring, which happens all the time in the Hebrew Bible. But here it's especially effective because the passage itself is about mirroring, right? It's about man coming into being as an image of God. And so those two lines mirror each other. And then the third line introduces a new thought by expanding Adamah, which is man, earth, humankind, or Adam, into male and female. So there's a primal link here between love, romantic love, and dignity, the very link we are pursuing today. Adam and Eve mirror each other, and it's as a mirroring couple, finding their own better selves or souls in the other person, that they mirror God. It's not enough that one person, Adam, mirror God. That's lines 1 to 2. Instead, there's this relational element that gets added in. It's when two people love each other, recognize each other, honor each other, that they mirror God. And I think that's very Shakespearean. So let's take that back to Romeo and Juliet. So where do we see the language of the Imago Dei in this play? I want to look at this famous exchange at the start of the balcony scene. And remember that this exchange doesn't just take place on a balcony. It's a balcony overlooking an orchard, a garden. And so there is a memory of Eden growing in these lines. Ava, if you're up for it, some of the most famous lines in Shakespeare.
'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is not hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Okay, so what's in a name? Although Juliet touches on, indeed caresses Romeo's first name, it's their family names that set the two houses alike in dignity against each other. And this is not dignity as inherent worth, the Imago Dei, but it's status dignity. And so what Juliet wants to do is to suspend the power of great families to determine worth in the city by demystifying those status conferring names. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And it's really striking to me here that she focuses on the fragrance of the rose, not its physical aspect. So why would she do that? Well, the sweet smell of the rose implies a spiritual essence, right? An odor, a perfume, an aroma, something invisible and yet determinant of what the rose is. Fragrance is fragile and inevitable, but it can also be distilled through the process of sublimation into perfume. And poetry itself is a form of distillation, right, that takes the ambient language of love and purifies and preserves it as verse. And Juliet senses a similar essence in Romeo, right, what she calls his dear perfection, which is what resonates within him and touches her as the soulful core of his personhood and being. So what's Romeo's response? He's pretty excited by this philosopher girlfriend that he's just met. And here's what he says, Ava.
I take thee at thy word. Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth I never will be Romeo.
Okay, so new baptized. We are getting into the heart of it. What is new baptism? Well, I mean, he's saying he'd be happy to be baptized again, right? To take another name in order to escape being a Montague. So new just means another, a second baptism. But I think he's also suggesting that they create a new form of baptism, right? A baptism in love. He says, just call me love. A baptism conferred by two persons in response to each other. Now, baptism, dignity, and the Imago Dei are closely related in Catholic theology. In this worldview, sin, right, which is my own sin, but also the original sin that I inherit from Adam and Eve, sin degrades my dignity, right, my capacities for virtuous action. And so what baptism does in this tradition is renew the Imago Dei. All baptism is new baptism insofar as it cleanses and renews that imago. And I'm sure there are people in this room who know a lot more about this than I do, so we can get into the theology and the discussion if you'd like. So what about Romeo and Juliet? Well, one commentator has called them a new Adam and Eve, whose love recreates the world, right? To be new baptized in love is to become a new person with and through another human being, and to begin the work of creating a world in which love and dignity can go hand in hand and flow more freely. Now, I don't think the lovers are thinking about dignity. They're just totally into each other. But I do think that by dropping dignity at the end of the first line of the play, Shakespeare is giving us a tool for tracing the ethical stakes of this tragedy, which keeps reaching for the stars. When Romeo and Juliet freely recognize each other outside the family framework, they begin to transform dignity from status to human worth. And they do this not as philosophers, but as ethical actors, right? They do it through the way they speak to each other, the way they handle poetic language, and ultimately the way they imagine their place in the magnificence of the cosmos. Remember that relationality that was introduced in the third line of Hebrew verse, right? Male and female, he created them. Dignity in Romeo and Juliet is relational. It's the Imago Dei as the pattern left by the way the lovers greet and treat each other. Dignity belongs not to the dancer, but to the dance, right? Not to the palmer, but to the palmer's kiss. Well, spoiler alert, the play ends disastrously in the Capulet crypt. So what is this crypt? The crypt, like Plato's cave, is the place where old forms of dignity trap people in archaic patterns of rivalry and control. Any new relationality is exiled to the starry firmament where the lover's story takes shape as a beacon to others, right? Remember our lighthouse from last week's 12th night, but not as a reality in their own lives, which end too quickly. So why do the lovers fall short of the dignity to which they so courageously aspire? And I think there's three reasons for this. The first is that it's too swift, right? After that careful pacing of the sonnet, they gallop apace like wanton horses into each other's arms and beds. And dignity implies a certain tempo, a certain reserve that these teenagers can't yet maintain. Juliet already knows this in the balcony scene. Ava?
Although I joy in thee, I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens.
Beautiful. So too rash, too unadvised, too sudden. Also, I think too private. Although they recognize each other as lovers, there is no social recognition. They don't involve their family or friends in the real symbolic work that they have undertaken. They need to somehow find a way to return to that social dance where everyone touches palms and changes partners. And I realize this is a mom's reading of the play, but I can't help myself. Finally, and most decisively, Romeo's impulsive decision to avenge the death of Mercutio by killing Tybalt, rather than maintain his fidelity to Juliet, reneges on the utopian promise of their new baptism. So, like the Trojans in Troilus and Cressida, Romeo is caught between the battle for prestige and the inherent worth of Juliet. And he allows that battle for prestige to draw him back into its maw. Yet, I think that Shakespeare does hold out the power of love to transform social relationships. When the whole city gathers around the bodies at the end of the play, that family crypt of suffocating entombment begins to become a civic space for new forms of recognition. And the rivals shake hands and they make a pledge under the direction of the prince. Ava?
O brother Montague, give me thy hand. This is my daughter's jointure, for no more can I demand. But I can give thee more, for I will raise her statue in pure gold, that while Verona by that name is known, there shall no figure at such rate be set as that of true and faithful Juliet. As rich shall Romeo's by his ladies lie, poor sacrifices of our enmity. A glooming peace this morning with it brings. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Some shall be pardoned, and some punished. For never was a story of more woe than this of her Juliet and her Romeo.
That's the end of the play. It's beautiful. This exchange is often read today, cynically or ironically, as a failed effort at reconciliation. The old guys are still competing to outdo each other, and gold is a material thing, right? It's far inferior to the eternal verse of Shakespeare's play, which is the real distillation of the lover's worth. And I think there's some truth in that. But I also think that Shakespeare holds out hope for Verona. As light reflecting images of two human persons joined in love, the gold statues recall the shrine created by the Palmer's kiss. That double image of the two lovers, the imago Dei that they compose together, glows in the glooming peace of the dark morning as a sign of hope. And it's important that the two fathers shake hands. This is their own dignified version of the Palmer's kiss. The two fathers, along with the prince, aspire to a civic dignity composed of both forgiveness and justice. And if we return to that passage one final time, notice that they are speaking verse together, right? They're groping towards a kind of shared sonnet, a chorus in three parts that ends with the play's final couplet and coupling. What has made them capable of this reconciliation? I think it's not only their shared grief at these poor sacrifices. We also saw in the party scene that Capulet was capable of genuine hospitality, which I have called the mother of all virtues. And so I think that pre-political virtue of hospitality is being drawn upon as the basis of a reformed civic order that is more capable of sharing, recognizing, and cultivating dignity than the one that came before. So I think there's a lot to love here and a lot to aspire to. Dialogue across differences, acknowledgement of shared humanity, the free exercise of hospitality, and also a commitment to building a more just society through public art and public poetry, including the dramatic poetry embodied by theater.